各位好，欢迎收看 Channel 33全新节目33高峰会，我是 Clarence 张梦华。我将在这个节目中邀请您登上时势瞭望的舞台，我们一起来关心下新西兰最前沿的政坛动态。每个月呢，我都将专访新西兰的总理 Christopher Luxon 以及反对党的领袖工党党魁 Chris Hipkins。在首期节目中呢，我们先从工党的党魁 Chris Hipkins 说起。在访谈中我询问了他最近的工作重点是什么，同时呢，也探讨了他最近发表的国情咨文，他到底想向新西兰的民众传递什么样的信息？此外呢，就是反对党在政府部门裁员这个问题上又是怎样的看法与立场？最后，当然就是他接下来的计划了。那开了党团会议之后，有没有想到什么好的 idea？ 好了，话不多说，让我们一起走进今天的节目，看看 Chris Hipkins 最近在忙什么，以及他的国情咨文到底想要传递什么信息。
It's been a busy time. Obviously, we've been making the adjustment from being the government to being the opposition and making sure our team are all familiar with the new jobs that they've got now, which is to hold the government accountable and come up with some new ideas for the challenges that the country's facing. So that's really where our focus has been lately. We've obviously been questioning the government on some of the decisions that they've been making around government budget decisions and around the shape of the economy and law and order and variety of issues that we know New Zealanders want to see the government taking action on. And then we've also been, doing some policy thinking of our own as we start to think about, what we'll campaign on in 2026 when the next election rolls around. One of the core purposes of having the Labour Party, one of our missions, is to make sure that people who work hard are able to get ahead through their hard work. So we want to make sure that work pays. It's a basic sort of concept that the Labour movement was founded on, that the people who go out, work hard day in, day out, should actually be rewarded for their hard work. They should get a fair share of the gains that come from their hard work. And in the modern economy, we're hearing more and more New Zealanders who feel like that's not what they're getting. They're working really, really hard, but they don't feel like, they're getting ahead because of their hard work. They still can't afford to buy a house. And in many cases, many of them are just struggling to meet their day-to-day bills, let alone actually feel like they're making progress. We want people to feel like they can make a better life for themselves and their families. So that's our goal. We want to see incomes growing. We want to see people earning more from the hard work that they've been doing. We want to make sure that the tax system is fairer, because at the moment, people who are earning salary and wages are paying more proportionately compared to people who are earning through wealth. And we think that's an unfairness in the tax system. If you should pay tax on your income, regardless of how your income is earned. And if everybody paid their fair share of tax, then actually some New Zealanders would end up paying less. Because at the moment, salary and wage earners actually pay a disproportionate share of it. We have one, overarching priority for the tax system, which is to make it fairer. We want the tax system to be a fairer tax system, one in which, one group of New Zealanders, salary and wage earners, doesn't shoulder a disproportionate share of paying tax compared to other New Zealanders. We think everybody should pay their fair share of tax. I believe that taxes are important. Taxes are how we pay for our police. They're how we pay for our health system, our education system. They're how we pay for our defence force. They're how we pay for our roads and, our investment in public infrastructure. And so we all have a responsibility to pay our fair share. The reality is that some New Zealanders are doing that and some New Zealanders are not. And so we want the tax system to be fairer. How we do that, there's all sorts of options. We'll set out a discussion paper fairly soon that'll set out the big ones. So things like a wealth tax, a capital gains tax, a land tax, we'll look at those options. They're not the only options too. We also have to look at where people are avoiding paying their fair share of tax and make sure that we're closing those loopholes so that people can't, who have a lot of money can't use that money to avoid paying their share of tax. So that's the discussion that we're going to have over the next little while. I want to go into the next election with a really clear set of proposals. I think that we've had a lot of discussion around the unfairness of our tax system under successive governments, Labour and National. I think there's a lot of evidence that it is unfair. So now we need to actually do something about that. So I'm pretty determined that at the next election we will, and we'll be very specific about what it is we're going to do, who will be affected, who will pay, who won't, who will benefit. And that's the work we've got to do in the next year and a half or so.
从 Hipkins 的这份国情咨文中呢，我们了解到了最重要的一点，那就是工党的税收政策可能会出现非常大的变化，诸如财富税这样的税种呢，也会重新的搬上台面。 那么工党税收政策到底会怎么改变呢？他们研究的重点会是什么？有没有事先做过任何的调查呢？
Yeah, well, that's exactly the point. A lot of research has been done. Even the International Monetary Fund, they're not exactly a left-wing think tank, the International Monetary Fund. They were here last week and they said New Zealand's tax system is unfair, it's unbalanced, and we do need to think about something like it. They were particularly arguing for land tax and capital gains tax. Whether that's the right answer or not is the issue that we've got to work through. But the problem definition is pretty clear. And actually, if you talk to economists, economists who aren't even, sympathetic to the Labour Party, they will tell you that the tax system's unfair. So we know what the problem is. Now we've actually got to make sure that the answers that we're coming up with are the right answers.
好了，那说完自己之后呢，再来说说对方吧。那新的联合政府已经执政了4个多月的时间，作为反对党的领袖，会怎样评价政府目前的表现呢？
I think the new government's had the most shambolic start of any new government in New Zealand's MMP history. My memory doesn't go back much further than that. Even just yesterday, they released the budget policy statement. This is something that most governments release before Christmas. They've taken all the way through to the end of March to release it. And it's missing one very important fact, which is how much the government are intending to spend in the budget. Now, every other Minister of Finance under every other government's managed to come up with that figure and tell New Zealanders what it is. This government can't even come up with that. That's pretty basic, it's pretty fundamental.
等一下，这里我们要说明一个事实。虽然呢，过去几年工党的政府都是在12月份发布了下一年的预算声明，但是在2021年预算政策声明呢，也是在当年的年初发布的。为什么呢？因为2020年也大选了，所以呢，他这句话其实也不能说是完全正确的。我们接着听。
On the big issues that they campaigned on, cost of living, well, New Zealanders are still waiting to see what they're going to do about that. The cost of living's still going up and Kiwis are still feeling worse off. Employment, they're actually proposing more people being unemployed. And we had the Minister for Employment saying the other day that New Zealanders who lose their jobs should think about moving overseas. Where's the leadership in that? That's an abysmal position for the New Zealand government to be taking. It's the first time I've ever seen a New Zealand government actually telling people they should think about moving overseas for work. I just think that defies belief. So I think this government's all over the show. They don't seem to have a coherent plan for the future.
在这里呢，我也要插一句说就业部长 Louis Upston 所说的呢，就是在经济衰退期间新西兰可能会失去一些最优秀、最聪明的人才流失到海外。那处于这种境地的人呢，他是真的为他们感到难过的，他们不得不做出这样的艰难的选择。所以他到底算不算得上政府在鼓励人们从新西兰润走呢？我相信每一个人都会有自己的答案。不过随后我也询问了 Chris Hipkins 在工党执政期间，不是新西兰也出现了大量的人才流失，然后离开这个国家前往澳洲的新闻吗？让我们来听听他面露难色的回答。
And, I think New Zealanders who voted for change, and let's be clear, New Zealanders did vote for change, and I accept that. We were on the losing side of that. I accept that they voted for change, but I think when they're looking at this current government, I think New Zealanders have a right to be saying, is this the change we thought we were going to be getting? Because I don't think it was the change that they were promised. Well, they're currently living under a National Act to New Zealand First government, and it's shambolic, and they're making the country's problems worse, not better. I don't profess to say that all of our answers at the last election were perfect. We can go back now and have a look at those, and we'll come up with some better ones for the next election. But I certainly don't think we'd be making things worse in the way that this government are.
怎么样？您满不满意他的回答？那接下来我们再来转移一个话题那新政府减少繁文缛节与削减成本、善用开支的计划也是在大刀阔斧的进行中的。首当其冲呢就是裁员新西兰的各个部门都在面临各种各样的裁员。那么从反对党的角度上来看呢，哪个部门的裁员是工党最关心的呢？同时少数族裔部也准备裁员。那我们华人作为少数族裔也需要担心吗？
The government laying off thousands of people, putting thousands of people out of work, is not going to be good for the overall New Zealand economy. So here in Wellington, for example, where I live, I've been talking to businesses who are saying things have really slowed down. And they've slowed down because people aren't spending money, and they're not spending money because they're not secure. They don't feel like their job is secure, so they're not spending. So the cost of laying people off is borne by far more people than just the public service. the public service, particularly those who are losing their jobs, will really be feeling that. But actually, the rest of the country will feel that too, and businesses will feel that as the economy slows down because of the government's cuts. Things like the Ministry for Ethnic Communities, they run on the smell of an oily rag. They do an amazing job, given the relatively limited amount of funding they get. I think it's fantastic that we celebrate the Lantern Festival, we celebrate the Lunar New Year, we celebrate Diwali. The fact that they're now, those things are effectively going to be compromised because of their cuts that won't actually save that much money in the grand scheme of things. I think that's a real tragedy. The National Party before the election made a major pitch to New Zealand's ethnic communities, and since they've become the government, I think they've completely forgotten about the ethnic communities. They said that they were going to do something about the crime that's affecting ethnic communities. They've done nothing. They said that they were going to tackle the cost of living. They haven't. They said that they were going to deal with a variety of immigration issues. They made a bunch of promises on immigration issues. They haven't delivered on those. So again, I think our ethnic communities could be feeling pretty disappointed that what they thought they were getting, from a change of government, they're clearly not.
值得一提的是呢，现任的政府一直在强调，就说这一轮的裁员行动呢，实际上是在完成前朝工党政府应该做的事情。那他们呢认为，过度膨胀的公务员团队呢，就是会增加运作的成本，影响到政府的效率以及财政状况。那我们听听 Chris Hipkins 对此会有怎样的回应吧。
They said that they could do that without cutting into people's entitlements or cutting into the public services that New Zealanders rely on. That's been shown to be false. People with disabilities have found that their entitlements, the support that they rely on every day, is being cut because of this government. They're saying that they're threatening to cut the food and schools program. That's a frontline service that benefits literally 220,000 Kiwi kids every day. They're threatening to cut into that. Their commitment before the election that they weren't going to cut frontline services just isn't true. And also, let's talk about what they're talking about when they're talking about back office services. One of the things we've invested more money in are frontline services like the Ministry for Primary Industries and Customs, so that our border is more secure. For our farmers and for our growers, that is vital. Because if we have biosecurity incursions in New Zealand, the cost to them and the cost to our economy can be devastating. What's one of the first things that this government have done? Well, they've cut a lot of that extra funding that we put in. That's just asking for trouble. And, years down the track, something will happen. Everyone will scratch their head and say, how is this allowed to happen? And the answer will be pretty plain. It'll be because this government, this national-led government, cut funding for the very defences that we put in place.
还有一点非常有趣的是，国家党与工党似乎都在批评对方在分裂新西兰人，不搞团结。那关于这一点 ，Chris Hipkins 怎么看的呢？他又准备今后如何将人们团结起来呢？
Yeah, one of my goals in politics has always been to bring people together, not to divide them. And I'm really concerned that we've got a government at the moment that definitely seems to be trying to divide New Zealanders. We see that in some of their rhetoric. You've got Winston Peters saying that immigrants are responsible for higher unemployment. I don't think that's wrong, and I don't think that the Deputy Prime Minister or Minister of Foreign Affairs should be making those claims. So, I think, ultimately, our goal is to bring people together, and we try to do that in government, and we'll try and do that in opposition as well.
看得出 Chris Hipkins 还是斗志满满的。那早前我们对他进行的第一次专访的时候，他自己也说了，说自己不会退出，也不会辞职，会领导一个全新的工党征战下届大选。那么最近举办完这个工党内部的 Caucus Retreat 内部会议，又是怎样的呢？有没有想到任何新的计划呢？
We had a retreat a couple of weeks ago. The Labor team's actually in really good heart. I've got an amazing team of MPs, and everyone was disappointed to lose the election. There's no question about that. But actually, everyone's really committed to the work that we've got to do now. So our work has got to be to hold the government accountable, but it's got to be more than that. It's also got to be about coming up with better ideas. And everyone in our team's really committed to doing that. Everyone's working really well together. We don't have the infighting that the National Party, was so good at when they were in opposition. We've actually got a team who's really come together really well and is working cohesively together. And I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud to lead that team.
好的，感谢您收看我们第一期的33高峰会节目。在本期节目中呢，我们与工党的党魁 Chris Hipkins 进行了深入的交流，了解了他对于新西兰目前政治形势的见解。有的方面呢，他回答的还是很到位的， 但有些方面呢，又听着像听君一席话，胜听一席话一样。那未来呢，我们也希望有机会能把他再请来我们的演播室，面对面的再问他一些问题。也欢迎您继续锁定 Channel 33，与我们一同探寻新西兰政治的未来走向。感谢您的观看，我是 Clarence， 下期见。